My name is Raphael, and ever since my brother disappeared after rummaging through strange forums on the deep web, my life has turned into a trail of codes, masked IPs, and sleepless nights. The police said he simply vanished, like so many others, and closed the case with a cold, dry filing. But I knew there was more to it. It all started when I found a website he visited frequently, Whispers from Below. The name alone sent chills down my spine. The landing page was simple, raw, almost primitive, with a black background and flickering red letters that seemed to blink as I breathed. Beneath the title, a single phrase: "Are you willing to listen to what whispers in the dark?" My brother was fascinated by digital puzzles, conspiracy theories, and obscure programming languages, the kind of things you only find in places where no one should be. In the following weeks, I delved deeper and deeper into that world. My days turned into white noise, and my nights were filled with enigmatic symbols, distorted voices and audio files, and coordinates that seemed to lead nowhere, or to nowhere in this world. On Whispers from Below, I found traces of my brother, comments signed with his nickname, fragments of code in his style, even an old photo of us, distorted, as if someone had ripped it from the memory of a dream. Now, I follow that trail, and the closer I get to the truth, the more I feel that something is watching, something that doesn't want to be found, something that may have taken my brother. And if I continue, maybe it will take me too. The homepage was silent, dark, with the symbol of a skeletal hand holding a human eye, grotesquely realistic, as if it had been ripped from its socket seconds before the image was captured. There was no music, no ambient sound, only the almost imperceptible hum of my own computer, as if even it were uncomfortable. In the center of the screen, a single phrase blinked in dirty red, pulsing like an open wound. "Are you ready to hear the voices?" It wasn't a question, it was a warning. I felt my stomach churn, not from fear, but from something deeper. A primal instinct, that feeling you get when you know you're being watched, even though you're alone. The room was cold, but my hands were sweating. The cursor blinked, waiting for an action, any action. I tried to close the tab. Nothing happened. I tried to turn off the computer. The screen remained exactly the same. And then, the sound started. Low, almost like a whisper coming from far away. It wasn't just one voice, it was many. Layered, speaking languages I didn't understand. Some were crying, others were screaming, some were laughing. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was when, among all those murmurs, one voice stood out, familiar, faint, trembling. Raphael. It was my brother. After gaining access with the same code I found hidden in my brother's encrypted files, a sequence of letters and numbers mixed with symbols that didn't even belong to our alphabet. I was redirected to a hidden page within Whispers from Below. The layout was old, like an abandoned forum from the early 2000s, but there was something disturbing in the air, as if the website itself were breathing. Each post had a simple title: "The Man from the Wall," "The Song Without a Voice," "The Place Between the Mirrors," and they were all marked with the same tag: one true account. I began to read. These weren't ordinary creepypastas. They didn't have that fictional tone, that exaggeration. They were raw, detailed descriptions, sometimes almost banal, but with a weight that made me question what was real. The users described events they seemed to have lived through, with dates, times, full names. Some stories were accompanied by blurry photos, audios with interference, screenshots of deleted messages. Others included videos that shook so much, they seemed to be fighting against the file itself, trying not to exist. But the strangest thing was the movement. As I read, the posts changed. Words shifted places. Phrases appeared where there had been nothing before. One of the stories, which I was sure I had read the night before, now ended with my name. "Raphael, don't keep reading." I closed the tab, took a deep breath. When I returned, less than a minute later, the post had vanished, along with the user who had written it. Only then did I realize that this forum wasn't a collection of stories. It was a graveyard, and each post was a tombstone, waiting for someone to read it and bring it back to life. The first story I opened was about a cursed video. The title was simple, almost banal: She Approaches. The author, identified only as Null Eyes, described finding the file while searching through a forgotten directory, hidden within an underground server. One of those digital spaces that only exist for those who know exactly where to look. The video had no name, only a hexadecimal code as its title. No description, just 1 minute and 44 seconds of footage. At first it seemed harmless, an empty room, white walls, and fluorescent lighting. The image was static, as if it were footage from a forgotten security camera. But with each playback, something changed. The first time there was nothing, just silence. The second time, a shadow appeared in the background near the door. The third time she was there, a female figure, motionless with a hood covering her face. Her posture was rigid, almost unnatural. She did nothing, just watched. With each new viewing she advanced, inch by inch. Some forum users reported that after the 10th viewing, the figure was pressed against the camera, her hood hiding what appeared to be glowing eyes like the headlights of a car lost in the fog. Others said that after a certain point, the video stopped loading, but the reflection of the figure appeared on the screen, even with the monitor turned off. Null Eyes ended his post with a simple sentence written in lowercase as if in a hurry: "Don't watch until the end." Just below, the link to the file was still active, but it was crossed out. Someone or something had edited the post, and in place of the URL there was now a countdown: row 143, row 142, row 141. One of the most talked about stories on the forum came from a user named Null Entity. A discreet profile, no photo, no bio, but his posts had something different. It wasn't just the content, it was the tone. It felt like someone writing not to be read, but to be warned, as if they were trying to leave something behind before it was too late. He swore that after watching the cursed video from the underground server, something in his perception began to fragment. At first it was small things. He forgot what day it was. He'd look at the clock and not recognize the numbers. Then, the minutes stopped making sense. He'd sleep in the afternoon and wake up in the middle of the night. Or he thought it was night until he noticed the sun rising in reverse. But the most disturbing part was what was happening outside his head. Objects moved on their own. A book he'd left on the shelf would be found open on the bed, on the same page where he had paused the video. A mirror in the hallway appeared cracked, but no one had heard anything. One night, when he woke to a sharp sound coming from the computer, he ran into the dark room and saw the screen lit up, even though the PC was turned off. And there she was, the hooded woman, standing in the center of the image. But it wasn't a video, it was the reflection. She was on the monitor, but not in the room. The light flickered, the reflection disappeared, and Null Entity never posted again. His profile still exists, frozen, like a digital ghost. Last access, 3:33 a.m. Final post automatically edited, with a sentence no one knows who wrote. She's out of the screen. Another entry on the forum was different from the others. It didn't talk about videos, corrupted files, or digital whispers. It was more physical, almost like a glitch in the virtual reality itself. The post was simply titled, 33 degrees southwest, the concrete gate. It was signed by a user named V Occulto, known for crossing digital information with real-world coordinates. And in this one, he was straightforward. An abandoned warehouse hidden in the interior of Goiás, near an unnamed rural road. Detailed coordinates. The location was visible via satellite, but absent from any official map. 16-4791, 49.3467. The legend said that if someone showed up there exactly at 3:33 a.m., an invisible door would reveal itself in the concrete floor. A fine crack that vibrated under the beam of a flashlight, as if it were made of something the human eye was not meant to see. According to the account, no one could see this door with the naked eye during the day. But at that hour, in the absolute silence of the savannah, If you were alone and in total darkness, you could hear the sound of something dragging from the other side. A wet, rhythmic sound, like flesh moving through gears. V. Occulto said he tried to enter. He described a sensation of endless falling, as if he had been swallowed by a space between places. He said that inside, time didn't pass, or perhaps passed too quickly. There were voices speaking in sequence as if repeating parts of his memory. And in the center, a hexagonal room with symbols etched into the ceiling, all pulsing with a cold blue light. After that, the post turned into noise. Literally, jumbled words, binary code mixed with reversed sentences. No one could fully translate it. Some users tried to visit the place but returned with disconnected reports. One of them, weeks later, reappeared online saying he woke up at home with his feet covered in concrete. But the most terrifying detail? In the satellite images taken after the original post, a strange shadow appears over the warehouse, and it changes shape with each update, as if something inside is still moving, waiting. The accounts of those who returned from there were always unsettling. Something had changed in them, something not immediately visible but present, subtle in the spaces between each word, in the dead gleam of their eyes. Those who came back no longer spoke as they did before. They spoke in non-existent tongues, disconnected words that sounded like a mix of laments and muffled screams. No one could understand what they were saying, but the feeling was clear. It wasn't a human language, and the eyes, those eyes were the worst. They were no longer the same, opaque, lifeless as if the soul had been taken, leaving only an empty shell behind. Many of them avoided looking in mirrors, saying that when they did, they could see what they were truly carrying inside. Something dark, something that shouldn't be there. But the most terrible thing happened to one of the returnees, a man who had come back from the warehouse after a week of being missing, completely insane. He isolated himself in an apartment in the city center, and for days no one heard from him. When someone tried to visit, the door was open, but the room was empty, except for a broken window. On the wall, one word was written in blood, repeated several times. Furious. V. Occulto's last post was dated that same day, and the title was simple: They Don't Like Being Awakened. It was only after that that the police found the body. The man, already with that vacant look, had thrown himself from the 4th floor of an old building, dying on the sidewalk below. His last words, spoken to a police officer who reached him in his final moments, were chilling. The voices beneath the earth are furious. And just like that, the account was lost, like so many others, without explanation, without meaning. But something in those vacant eyes still seemed to beg to be heard, as if in some way he had been trying to warn before falling into the final silence. I felt a constant chill as I read, as if the words on the screen were dragging a cold breeze directly into my soul. With each new post I opened, a shiver ran up my spine, causing my body to tense, as if I were being watched, or worse, waiting for something to touch me in an invisible way. The sensation wasn't just simple fear. It was an oppression, a subtle presence that seemed to be there but hid well in the shadows of every message. The forum was, seemingly, frozen. There were no new posts, no updates. The date of the last post was weeks ago, but even so, something was wrong. The pages were updating on their own. It wasn't like a simple cache error or some kind of technical bug. It was more like the words were being written for me. I read, and as I spent more time there, an increasingly intense feeling that someone was watching me grew, that someone knew exactly where I was and what I was doing. The posts didn't speak directly to me, but at the same time it felt like they were. The phrases that appeared on the screens were shaping themselves to my thoughts, as if they had been written after I clicked on the page. You're reading this right now, aren't you? I saw you enter. Curious? Don't stop. I closed the forum several times, my hands trembling, trying to shake off the growing discomfort. But each time I returned, the posts were already different. The interface seemed to warp, the characters changing into sequences I recognized, as if the very code were trying to communicate something to me. Even the messages were being formed as I watched them, as if someone was writing to me, waiting for my response. The most disturbing thing happened after a few hours, when a post suddenly appeared. The title was simple: "I know what you did yesterday." I had no more doubts. I wasn't just reading a forum. I was becoming part of it. And something was calling me inside. One night, as I was browsing the forum, a link suddenly appeared without warning, as if it had been planted directly in front of me. It was in Latin, with letters that seemed to distort as I tried to focus on them. The message was short, direct. Vocatus est. My heart raced. Called. The word echoed in my mind, a warning, or perhaps an order. For some reason, I couldn't resist. Without thinking twice, I clicked. The screen trembled, as if the computer were trying to refuse the action, but there was no turning back. The loading was quick, almost instantaneous, and then the image appeared before me. It was a live stream, but of a sinister quality. The setting was too familiar. A dark room, the same layout as mine. Even the Misfits poster on the wall, slightly crooked, reflected on the screen. But something was wrong. Something made my breath catch in my throat. In the corner, barely lit by the weak light of the monitor, there was a figure. It stood still, unmoving, its head slightly tilted as if watching me. It was hard to make out details. The environment was too dark, but the contours of the figure seemed familiar. I felt a growing sense of discomfort, as if the air around me was becoming heavier. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen, but the scariest thing was that, even though I knew I was watching a live broadcast, the figure didn't move. There was no sound, and the camera was still focused on that single point. On that being, standing in the dark, eyes fixed on me, as if it knew exactly who I was. Time seemed to stop. I could no longer look away. I couldn't leave. The sensation that something was getting closer, something I already knew but didn't want to remember, engulfed me. My hands were cold, my fingers unable to press any keys. Suddenly, the figure moved. It wasn't a sharp movement, but rather a slight rotation of the head, a shift as if it were trying to look directly at the camera, at me. I felt my stomach turn. The figure was me. The image, the room, everything. It was as if someone had made a perfect copy of me, but something was wrong. Something was out of place, and then, in small letters in the corner of the screen, a message appeared. "You're inside now." The figure on the screen didn't move. It stood still, like a shadow, in the darkest corner of the room that seemed to be my room, but with something deeply wrong. It wore a bloodied sack over its head, the red stains spreading grotesquely, as if something had been brutally placed there, leaving a mark that couldn't be erased. The body was motionless, but the terror was palpable. There was no sound, not even a faint breath. The figure was sober, like a statue, a mirror of a distorted reality, as if waiting for me to make the first move. The eyes were not visible, but something about its presence made my entire body shiver, a suffocating feeling, as if the air was disappearing. The strangest, most disturbing thing was the viewer counter in the corner of the screen. I took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it. I had entered alone. There was no one else on the forum, no one in any of the open windows, just me and that grotesque stream. And yet, the number on the screen said 2. It was impossible. The room was empty, the apartment silent. But something on the screen, in that exact image, made me question. Was the figure looking directly at the camera or at me? I didn't know anymore. I was seeing it, but I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'm not alone, am I? The question, which I hadn't known I was thinking, escaped my lips in a whisper. But no one answered, or maybe someone had answered. Maybe I wasn't the only one there after all. The figure, motionless, continued to not move. The viewer counter didn't change. 2. And in that moment, something inside me knew with clarity. It wasn't just the number on the screen that was wrong. Maybe I was watching, but I wasn't alone in this. Not anymore. The figure on the screen, which had remained motionless for so long, suddenly turned. The movement was slow, dragged out, as if the very image was being forced to change. to distort. The head, once tilted to the side, spun with a silent agony, and its eyes, or rather the emptiness where the eyes should have been, locked directly onto me. I froze. Then, something happened. The figure with the bloodied sack still stuck to its head whispered. The voice was low, almost muffled, as if trying to escape from some distant place. But the word was clear, sharp, as if it had been spoken directly inside my mind. "Raphael, stop searching." The blood froze in my veins. I couldn't breathe. I didn't know how, but the feeling of being watched in a way that transcended the physical, of being called by something that already knew who I was, overwhelmed me completely. I tried to move, tried to close the window, but my body didn't respond. Before I could react, the stream screen flickered. The image of the figure disappeared, and the black background took over, without explanation, as if something had cut the connection. The stream crashed. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do, the sound of my heavy breathing filling the silence. My hands shook completely out of control, and my vision began to blur. But then, something even stranger happened. A metallic, pungent smell began to fill the air. It was the smell of fresh blood. The odor was so strong, so dense it seemed to be seeping through the walls. I looked around, trying to understand where it was coming from, until I realized the air conditioning was on, and the vents were exhaling that smell, as if something were infiltrating my very environment. The house was in complete silence, but the smell spread with suffocating intensity. I closed my eyes, trying to push away the sensation, but everything in me screamed that something was there, inside that space, waiting. And in that moment, the realization hit me with terrifying clarity. What I was investigating wasn't just digital, but something that had shattered the boundaries between worlds. I wasn't alone anymore. Você disse. Since that day, things have never been the same. Every night, as if obeying an invisible command, my laptop would turn on by itself, always at 3:33 a.m. There was no logical explanation for it. The computer was off, with no settings that could have caused the phenomenon. But still, every day, at that exact hour, the screen would light up and the cold glow of the monitor would fill the darkness of my room. Even more disturbing was what happened after the machine turned on. Random videos would start appearing in the history. They weren't videos I had watched, and many of them weren't from sources I recognized. Some were untouched, as if they had been downloaded to my account by someone or something I couldn't identify. In one of these videos, the image that appeared made me stop breathing for a long moment. It was my brother, but it wasn't him anymore. His eyes were completely opaque, lifeless, as if his soul had been drained. He was standing still in a dark room, with his head slightly tilted to the side, as if he were looking at me or at someone behind the camera. The silence in the video was absolute, and the feeling that something was about to happen made the air around me heavy. But the most unbearable part was what happened when my brother's eyes locked onto the lens. Behind him, in a dark corner of the frame, something whispered. I couldn't understand the words immediately, but a part of me already knew. It was my voice, my own voice echoing through the video, saying something I didn't want to hear. I froze. The sound of my own voice, low and hissing, seemed to come from a place beyond my comprehension. It was as if something was using my throat to speak, a presence that had taken over what was left of me. "You should have stopped, Raphael." That's what the voice said, but not my voice. It was as though someone was speaking directly to me, manipulating my words, distorting my essence. The screen then flickered and the video cut out. I couldn't process it. I was in shock, trying to understand what was happening. But one thing was certain. I was being pulled into something much bigger than I had imagined. Something that went beyond the internet, beyond the digital world. Something that came from much closer. And every night the clock would hit 3:33. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. Still, I continued. I can't explain why. It was as if the sight had some kind of power over me, an invisible force that pulled me deeper and deeper, like a vortex that swallows without mercy. I knew I was sinking into something with no way out, but I couldn't stop. Each click, each post, dragged me further into this digital abyss. Then I found something truly disturbing. A simple post with a direct link and a title that seemed to call to me in a hypnotic way. The Hollow Path. There was no description, just the link. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity overtook me as always. I clicked. The game seemed simple at first. A black screen with minimal instructions. The interface was minimalist, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger as the loading finished. In the center of the screen, a phrase appeared. Enter your name. I did without thinking. As soon as I pressed enter, the screen distorted slightly, as if reality itself was molding around me. The next instructions were even more enigmatic. The path is empty. You must walk. As the game progressed, I found myself in an endless corridor, dark and narrow. With each step I took, the walls seemed to move, as if the space was changing around me, as if I was being led by something beyond simple code. At every turn, a new choice appeared, and with it, a new distortion of reality. Then, the most terrifying part began. The game recognizes your fears and recreates them. The words appeared on the screen as a warning, but I had already started playing, and now it was too late to turn back. Something began to form before me, a shadow that expanded slowly. It wasn't something I recognized, but somehow, I felt it was being shaped from something very personal. With each new step in the corridor, my insecurities began to materialize. A hooded figure appeared before me, its face covered, but its eyes were mine. I knew what it represented. My deepest fears, the ones I had never shared with anyone. It was as if the game knew exactly what I feared and brought it to life in a grotesque way. But the most terrifying part was when the figure spoke. Not with a voice, but with a whisper echoing inside my mind. You cannot escape, you cannot run. I took a deep breath, trying to exit the game, but the cursor didn't respond. The path ahead of me seemed to stretch endlessly, and the figure continued to watch me, waiting. The scariest thing was realizing that I was the creation of that game. The fears, my worst nightmares, were there, waiting to be revealed. And I knew, without a doubt, that every player saw something different, something intimate, something that should never be exposed. But what haunted me most was that now, I no longer knew where the game ended and where my reality began. I was trapped on a path with no way out. And maybe that's what the site had wanted all along. Você disse, as I advanced through the endless corridor, something began to change. The game, which until then had seemed only a distortion of my fears and insecurities, started to feel more and more real. I didn't know what else could appear before me, but one thing became clear. The game was leading me to something specific. It didn't just want to scare me, it wanted to show me something. Then I reached the end. The screen trembled, and for a brief moment everything around me disappeared. The corridor vanished, the figures and shadows faded. All that remained was an image, simple and direct, as if it were a window into my own fate. You will see your end. The words appeared slowly, but there was no turning back. Before I could react, the scene began to form. I was back in my room, but something was wrong. I saw myself sitting in the chair, the glow of the computer screen lighting up my face. But something was approaching me, something invisible. And then, a chill ran down my spine. I saw a figure behind me, something I didn't recognize, but somehow it felt familiar. The shadow moved closer without making a sound, and before I could move, I felt pressure on my throat. A cold, sharp blade touched my skin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I only saw the blade drawing closer and closer until the screen flickered. The game abruptly closed, but the fear didn't leave me. Something inside me knew that vision wasn't just a scene from a game. I had seen my end. But what paralyzed me even more was the post I found later, when I returned to the forum, trying to process what I had just experienced. There was a recent post, written by a user named Echo Void, that seemed to describe exactly what I had experienced. He talked about playing the Hollow Path, and at the end, having seen his own death. The description was almost identical to my vision. he saw his throat being slashed from behind with a sharp blade. And 3 days later, he was found, exactly as he had seen in the game. The police are still investigating. I didn't know what to do. The fear now felt closer to me than ever. The game wasn't just an illusion. It wasn't just a line of code. It was becoming real, and I didn't know what would come next. Was the death I saw just a reflection of what's still to come? Or was the game warning me, giving me time to escape? With each passing day, the fear that I might be the next victim of this game whispered louder in my mind. And every night, my computer still turns on by itself at 3:33 a.m. As the days passed, I began to notice something unsettling in the posts. It was something subtle, almost imperceptible. But as I sifted through the reports, the repetitions began to accumulate. Words, names, symbols, small connections that couldn't be ignored. Whenever fear seemed to intensify, another detail would appear. Some users vaguely mentioned an entity, a presence. At first, it seemed just a rumor, a legend shared among those who ventured into the same digital depths. But as I read more and more, I began to understand that it wasn't a coincidence. It was always the same name, the Whisperer. The entity appeared in all the stories, in every account. Some said the Whisperer was an invisible presence that infiltrated the digital world, slipping through the cracks of forums, into forgotten files. Others spoke of a symbol, an inverted spiral with an eye in the center, always showing up in the most unexpected places, as if marking the spots where it manifested. And somehow, everything led to the same point. Those who see it, carry it. The words, simple and direct, were written in every account. But what made me tremble was the idea that it wasn't just referring to the act of seeing, but of touching, of interacting with what it left behind. It was as if the Whisperer fed on digital attention, on the curiosity of users, growing and strengthening with every click, every post read, every secret uncovered. I no longer knew what was real and what was just the effect of a mind that was beginning to unravel. But with each passing moment, I felt like I was being pulled deeper into something larger, more insidious. As if with every second I spent browsing that forum, I was getting closer to something that shouldn't be found. The stories about the Whisperer were always the same. People who became obsessed, unable to pull away from what they saw, from what they read, as if they were chosen to carry the weight of something beyond human comprehension. And then one night, while I was going through one of the posts, something else appeared. A direct message with no author, no explanation. It was simple, but terrifyingly clear. I saw you. And before I could understand what this meant, the sound on my computer began to falter, as if something was interfering directly with the system. The screen flickered, and I heard in a muffled whisper, something that froze my soul. Now you carry me. Você diz. That's when everything began to crumble. A private message appeared in my inbox, and the sender was a name I didn't recognize, but it felt familiar from somewhere. Maybe one of the forum moderators, someone who had access to what was happening behind the digital curtains. The subject had no title, but the message, simple and direct, made me freeze. You've passed the 5th report. Now it's in your neural network. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe a way of warning me that I was going too far, that the forum and the stories were playing with me. I laughed nervously, thinking it was an exaggeration, an attempt to increase the tension and fear. But deep down, something in those words unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. Then something happened. I was sitting there, as usual, listening to music with my headphones, trying to relax after hours of browsing the forum. The ambient sound of some playlist filled the space, but something was wrong. The music started to cut out. It wasn't a problem with the file or the headphones. It was as if another layer of sound was overlapping, something I hadn't put there. My own voice, coming from the depths of the headphones. At first, it was a faint whisper, almost imperceptible. I almost ignored it, thinking it was my imagination. But as the sound grew louder, I realized it wasn't an illusion. It was my own voice repeating the same words I had read in the posts. Now you carry me. The audio was strange, muffled, as if it hadn't been recorded in the moment. But it was clear enough to make me freeze with terror. I quickly took off the headphones, but the sound didn't stop. The voice was there, still whispering, now louder and clearer inside my mind. "Now you carry me." I tried to stand up, but my legs were weak, as if fear had drained all my energy. What was happening? How was my voice coming out of my headphones? I never recorded this, I never said those words. What terrified me the most was that, as the voice echoed, I could feel the presence of the whisperer drawing closer, as if he were inside me, inside the very sound. I no longer knew if what was happening was part of the game, a failure in my perception, or something even deeper, something that transcended the digital. And it was at that moment that I realized, maybe I wasn't just seeing the whisperer anymore. Maybe he was already inside me. Now, he was in my neural network. One night, something I never could have imagined happened. I was on the forum as usual, browsing the stories, trying to understand more about the whisperer, about everything that was happening. But suddenly the forum vanished. It wasn't just a simple glitch. No, the screen went completely dark, and an absolute emptiness took over my computer, as if everything I had read, all the reports, all the messages, had been erased. The site was offline. I sat there staring at the black screen, my heart racing, trying to understand what was happening. Then, in the center of the screen, a single message appeared, illuminated with an intensity that felt as though the computer itself were alive. "Now it's your turn to tell." The phrase glowed slowly, as if it were being written on the screen in real time. The cursor blinked, waiting, as if it had all the patience in the world, waiting for me to type. I tried to understand what was happening, but a sense of dread took over me. I didn't know what to do next. What was I supposed to tell? What did I have to offer when everything I knew now was marked by the presence of the whisperer? But something inside me knew I had no choice. I tried to escape, to lower my hands to the keyboard and force control over the computer. But nothing happened. The screen didn't respond to my commands, as if it had a life of its own. I pressed the keys, trying to close the site, but the forum wouldn't disappear. Instead, the cursor blinked even faster, like a heartbeat, as if it were watching me, waiting for me to do something. It was as if I were the next step in a ritual, the final link in a chain that had begun long before I even realized it. With each attempt to close the window, I could feel the whisperer's eyes on me, not physically, but in a way I couldn't explain. As if everything around me was being observed, as if he were there inside my computer, inside the screen. I was trapped. Not just in the forum, but in the very narrative that was unfolding. My own story was now part of that nightmare. I was being forced to tell something. Something I didn't want to, but that I knew was about to happen. The voice in my mind distorted, and I realized the whisperer wasn't just watching. He wanted my story. He wanted me to participate in the game, to become part of it, to tell my version. The screen flickered one last time, and the cursor waited. Still, as if I already knew what to do. I tried everything. I turned off the computer, disconnected the internet, destroyed my hard drive with my own hands, with a hammer, as if I could erase once and for all everything that had happened. I was sure that I was finally free. The whisperer could no longer reach me, no longer infiltrate my mind, my home. I was safe. But even with all that effort, something still wasn't right. Over time, I began to notice something strange. I was watching videos on YouTube, something simple to try to forget what had happened, when suddenly, in the middle of some random image, it appeared. The symbol. The skeletal hand with the eye in the center. It appeared for an instant, a millisecond, almost imperceptible. I blinked and it was there, but when I looked back at the screen, it was already gone. There was no doubt, it was the whisperer's symbol. I tried to ignore it, but the terror didn't leave me. I knew it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a coincidence. He was still there, watching, waiting. And then came the sound. At 3:33 in the morning, exactly when he always manifested, I heard it. A low, muffled sound, but clear enough to make me jump out of bed. Someone was typing. Not on my computer, but in the air, in the darkness of my room. I immediately got up and looked at the keyboard. Disconnected. The computer, turned off, was silent, but the sound persisted, as if someone was writing non-stop with fast, frantic fingers. My heart raced. I knew what this meant. It was him, the Whisperer. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that it was just the wind or some random noise, but there was no denying it. The feeling that something or someone was there, watching me, controlling me, intensified. That night, I tried to sleep, but the sound of the keys stayed in my mind. I can't get rid of it anymore. The Whisperer hasn't left me. He's in my mind, in my actions, in the things I see. He no longer needed a computer or a forum to reach me. He was already inside me, inside my world. I destroyed everything, deleted what I could. But he didn't go away. He won't go away. Now every sound, every click, every shadow that moves in my field of vision reminds me of him. And at 3:33, I know he's still there, typing, waiting for my story. I discovered too late. The Whisperer didn't want just readers. He didn't want mere spectators, people who would be frightened by the stories and then return to the safety of their daily lives. No. What he wanted, what he needed, were narrators. He needed new stories. I should have realized earlier, when I started hearing the other accounts on the forum. When I noticed that they all shared something in common. Real fear. Tangible fear. The kind that leaves you speechless, breathless. The kind that crawls into your bones. That's what fed the entity. He didn't satisfy himself with simple clicks or generic posts. No, he needed the stories to be created from genuine terror, from the visceral fear that arises when you know there's no escape, when you realize that your very reality is being corrupted. The more people hear, the stronger he becomes. Each account, each sentence heavy with dread that's shared, serves as fuel for his growing power. The Whisperer feeds off the attention he draws, the genuine panic that spreads as more and more minds are touched by his power. He doesn't need large crowds. Every ear that listens, every mind that feels his touch, makes the entity stronger, more real. And at a certain point, it's no longer enough to be a spectator. He starts looking for who might be the next storyteller, who might be the next one to dare narrate the experience he created. It's like a disease that spreads, a psychological virus turning fears into something concrete, something you live. And I became that, unwittingly. The fear took root in me, the feeling that what I was writing now was exactly what he wanted, exactly what he needed to grow stronger. I tried to resist. I tried to simply disappear, erase my digital presence, vanish from the world the Whisperer had conquered. But the truth is, he already possessed me. It was no longer possible to just walk away. With every word I wrote, I was feeding what shouldn't be fed. The Whisperer was inside me, in my hands, in my words, in my thoughts. Now, I am a narrator, and I know he's waiting for more. Waiting for you to read, for you to listen, for you to fear. Because like everything he touches, fear never dies. It only grows. If you've made it this far, pay attention. This is no longer just any story. It's no longer just a horror tale. It's not a fantasy you can simply leave behind. Your name has already been read. Your face has already been memorized. With every word you've read, every sentence that passed through your eyes, the Whisperer already knows who you are. He's already inside you, closer than you think. It may not seem like it, but now you're part of this. He's in what you felt, in the fear that began to grow in your chest. And if by chance you hear whispers tonight, don't be fooled. You are feeding the next story. These words, these sentences are no longer just mine. They are yours now too. The fear, the terror you felt, is the fuel the Whisperer needs to continue. And with every account, he grows stronger, spreads further, finds new victims who, like you, couldn't resist the temptation to go deeper, to know more, to get even closer to the darkness. When you close your eyes tonight, and if the silence is broken by a soft whisper, You might wonder if it was just your imagination, but believe me, it wasn't. He's there, close enough for you to hear him, close enough for him to begin invading your dreams. Now the Whisperer has what he wanted. Another story, another narrator. And you, unknowingly, helped feed the entity that grows with every word that touches the soul. So, remember, the next story will be yours.